It's the Misfits.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Ministry Misfits. Andrew and I are back in studio, finally together. First time for the new year.
We're kind of both healthy, at least healthy enough. So
Yeah.
we're here. We survived.
We did, yeah. We're closing down on the end of season 2. I almost said 3. I don't know why.
No, we are almost to
almost-
season 3.
Yeah.
We're almost done with season 2. We've got, 6-7 more weeks left before that. So if you have no idea what we're talking about, in the month of March, we're going to take a quick break. And then we will be back ready to go with season 3 in April, the first week of April. And until then, we do have some fun. Well, I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, we have different definitions of fun.
Yes, I think it's going to be fun. Some fun topics we're going to go through. We'll talk about next week's episode here at the end. But today's topic is one that has been requested of us quite a bit from multiple people online and in person.
And I'm sure there's a list of people saying not to do it too because they don't want to be potentially called out.
Well, they have us on multiple other lists for other things. So, we're going to talk today though about what it actually means to slander somebody from a biblical perspective. Because this is thrown around a lot of, you have slandered this person, so repent and tell me that I'm right. Is pretty much the order of things as far as how it goes.
Yes, you're wrong, I'm right.
You've slandered everybody, you've slandered God, you've slandered my favorite celebrity, and so now you must pay and publicly repent. But that is something that is not accurate in multiple different ways, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about it, first of all, why it's not accurate legally.
Yes.
Secondly, we're going to talk about why it's not accurately biblically at all. And so we're going to define what slander is legally. We're going to define what people actually are mad about legally. And then we're going to actually get into what we mean as far as biblical slander. And that's the important piece, is biblical.
Yeah. Because I think the other word as we get into this, a lot of us when we use our words, we don't always know what we mean, or we interchange something to mean something else. But both in this biblical sense and in the legal sense, we're going to talk about really the true difference between these two things.
Especially when the people that are using these words a lot are trying to make it a issue of salvation.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we definitely have to step in and say, no. If you're going to do this, you better do it correctly. So, we're going to start actually with Webster's. It's been a while since we've gone to Webster's, but we're back to Webster's.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you feeling more at home now?
That's right. Yeah, we're bringing our hometown dictionary with us.
That's right.
I'm feeling good.
So, the definition for slander is the utterance of false charges or misrepresentations which defame and damage another's reputation, or a false and defamatory oral statement about a person. There are a couple of key things to it. The first one is that it is a false charge or defamatory misrepresentation. So if somebody says something that you don't like, that's attacking you, and it's 100% true, you have not been slandered. You've been called out.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean you're going to like it any better, but it doesn't mean you can call out somebody as a slanderer if they actually have the receipts to show that this is actually true.
Correct.
The second part of this, which is where it gets real fun online, is what part of it, Brandon? What's the other key to being slander?
The other part, are you saying the other word? Or
yes, the other part of the slander definition as to what it has to be slander.
Gotcha. So that would be a false or defamatory oral statement about a person, which really the key word there is the oral or
it's
spoken.
Oral.
Yep.
Yeah. It's an utterance of false charges, or it's an oral statement. So if we were to say something on this podcast, it could be slander.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody is calling somebody out on Twitter, it is not slander because it is not an oral speech that has been done.
Mm-hmm.
What that would be is this other word, which this is the other thing, especially on Twitter where there's a character count limit. Why would you pick slander when the word that you actually need is much shorter and saves you some characters? Is libel, which the word libel.
And I'm going to spell that out, too, because it does sound like liable, but this is libel.
No, this is libel.
Libel.
Yes, libel. A written statement in which a plaintiff in certain courts sets forth the cause of action or the relief sought out. So it's the written statement in court, or it's a written or oral defamatory statement or representation that conveys an unjustly unfavorable impression. So it's the exact same thing as slander, except for that in this case, it's also when it's written down.
Mm-hmm.
That is what you are actually complaining about when people are talking bad about you online.
Yeah, and typically from a historical standpoint, too, as you talked about, there's the legal side to both of these as well. If we go back to really the early stages of America or even in England, a lot of these press releases that were written either about the kings or even the churches, there was some heavy
penalty.
Yes, of potentially death and or I don't know, getting kicked out of the church if it was from that
excommunication,
sense.
Burning at the stake, what do we burn with witches, all of that good stuff.
Yeah. So before the social media, this
has been going on for a while. Newspapers, everything. And this is where, from a American perspective, freedom of speech does have its limits because there are actual legal things that you cannot even write or say about somebody else if it's not true.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe each of these is typically divided each by the state as well, right? I think each state has their own laws.
That I have no idea about.
Okay, I'm pretty sure each state has their own.
It's very possible. Very possible.
Libel and slander laws.
And, all of this seems super nitpicky. Like you're just trying, and this is something where people that are going to turn around and libel us of saying, we are just trying to cause trouble because why do we need to care about whether it's slander or libel when it's just somebody yelling on social media? There is a reason for us wanting to make sure this is actually very clear. If you are going to call out somebody for sin, you need to be very specific about why you think this is sin. So if you can't even get what you are accusing them of correct, is it really worth actually accusing them of it?
Well, as I said towards the beginning, I think libel is just not a typical word within our vocabulary on a day-to-day basis. So though people may be saying slander, they probably don't really know what the other side is of the libel and that there might even be two. I don't want to discredit everyone on that. But
you don't want to slander anybody about that,
exactly.
Right?
I'm not going to. I don't have a name to pull up, anyways. But I think it's just not something always used either, and both can be correlated to defamation.
Right.
So slander and libel can be both forms of defamation, but again, the really big difference is the oral versus the written.
And the other key piece to this that we need is that even if it's defamation, does not necessarily mean that it's slander or libel. Because if the statement is not false, it's not slander or libel. It's just you've been caught.
Or your opinion.
Or an opinion. The other side of it is that just because it's false doesn't even mean that it's slander or libel. Because it may simply just be misinformation. A source that I had on this topic gave me proof that this is what it was. It turns out that proof was fake. I am not slandering you. I am just unfortunately guilty of having misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other reason why we have to be careful about throwing out these kind of accusations against people is we don't know the heart behind why they are doing this most of the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it may just be that they're bad reporters. When we're talking about the media,
yes,
they may just be bad at their job. Sometimes it is the fact that they are trying to cause problems. They are trying to defame. They are trying to do this, or this.
Yeah, or twist a story.
Or, twisting the stories, bending the truth, all of those sort of things. That is always a possibility, but we don't necessarily know that that's actually the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so before we go out trying to accuse people of this, and especially if we are accusing them of doing it in a sinful way that we are now calling their salvation into question, we need to be 100% sure that that is what they are doing. And we also need to be 100% accurate in what we are accusing them of doing. Now, those are all the legal definitions and terms, not necessarily the biblical terms, because libel does not show up in Scripture.
No, slander shows up.
Yes, it does. And there's some interesting things about the Bible definitions as far as the words that can be translated to slander. Within Hebrew, there are two main ones. You have Rakel, which is slander, but it's also the idea of tale bearing. Tale, not bearing of tales.
Yes.
It is going out and bearing of tales in terms of their storytelling.
Their storytelling, yeah.
But it's storytelling that is being done specifically for some type of reason. And normally
there's an intent there.
Yes. Normally it's a sociological or a political reasoning. The other word that can be translated is similar. It's regel. It's the weird thing with this is that it means to go about on foot and spy. So a spy is a slanderer, right? Spies go and they collect information.
I guess I never thought of it as that way.
They exploit the people that they're getting the information from. They're probably providing some false information in there as well with the purpose of defeating the enemy that they are spying on.
Mm-hmm.
That's not normally what we think about when we talk about this idea of slandering, but that is, when we actually stop and break it down, that's exactly what it actually is.
True. It's that intentionality to go out of your way,
right,
to either gather and or harm.
And the key word you said there was intentionality,
mm-hmm.
which again is why we were saying with the legal stuff, you better be sure before you do this. Both you need to be intentional of accusing somebody, and they need to be intentional in what they are doing before you accuse them. Now, within the Greek, we have really just one word, and it's diabolo, which is to bring charges with hostile intent. That's a completely different idea than even what we saw within the Hebrew. Because within the Hebrew, it was very kind of just shady, and it was very much we're going to cause trouble, and we're going to do something for our own benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Even the idea of tale-bearing, you're doing it for some reason, even if it's just attention.
Yeah.
But now in the Greek, now it's something a little bit more serious of, I am actually charging you with this. And I am doing it intentionally and intentionally hostile.
Mm.
Changes a little bit of the way that we think about what we mean when we talk about biblically slandering somebody now, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's, I would say, a lot of hate built up within that. And again, as we've talked about with a lot of topics, it's really your heart posture on things, especially online or anything written. I mean, you think of anybody sending an email and you'd say, somebody sent something across, oh, that you sent me the most angry email ever. And
my caps lock was stuck.
And somebody's like, that's not what my intent was. And so sometimes that heart could be changed and it's taken into interpretation as well.
And the interesting thing also with, especially online, when we look at it from this idea of you're bringing hostile charges against somebody, is that the slander may not even be on the person that is typing it out, and it may be on the person reading it. Because the person reading it is assuming hostile intent on the other person because they believe that they are not capable of doing anything good. The defamation, the idea of you no longer have the status of deserving the respect is on the reader at that point and not on the person that has even made the statement itself. Again, legally, that's not going to hold up in court.
No.
But we're not talking about legal slander right now.
That's why we're not lawyers.
We're talking about the biblical idea of what we read in Exodus of bearing false witness against our neighbors. So bearing false witness is three words within the Hebrew coming out of Exodus, which we're not going to look at all three of those words or we'll be here forever. Instead, we're going to break down what it actually looks like to bear false witness within Scripture. So the first thing, obviously, is to lie.
Mm-hmm.
It's a false witness. It is a lie. It's also, going back to the Hebrew idea that we looked at as far as the words of slander, it's the idea of exploiting someone for your own benefit.
Mm.
The spies are exploiting the ignorance of the people that they are talking to for the benefit of either themselves or their country. It's obviously defamation.
Yeah, we talked
or
about
it wouldn't
that.
be slander if
Yep.
it wasn't defamation. Or it could be putting false expectations on your neighbor. You expect them to do this. And so if they don't meet your expectations, you now have put something on them as a label of you are now this because you can't do what I want you to do.
Yeah, I would have never thought of that last one of expectations there.
It's not something that is explicitly where we can point straight to a verse. But that's what I mean, that's part of what we have in the entire gospel story around Jesus and the religious leaders and the rest of Israel at the time. They had expectations of what the Messiah should be.
True.
Jesus did not meet those expectations. And so they falsely accused him of blasphemy. That was a false charge that was brought up, and it was always brought up with hostile intent on behalf of the religious rulers. I mean, that's what we read in the Gospels. They were trying to figure out what to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Lazarus had a hit put out on him after he was raised. If it was not for cruel, malicious intentions, there'd be no reason to kill a man that already had died once.
Yes. And also, it does bear a lot of importance, too, as the bearing false witness is one of the 10 commandments, too,
Right.
being the 9th commandment there of you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor.
And we've already talked in the 10 commandments, or not already, but, covetousness is part of this.
Yes.
You want something they have, so you must defame them to get it. Lying is in there already. Cheating on people is in there already.
Pride
is the first 4.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, but yet the idea of not bearing false witness is something that is important enough that God is going to put it in there by itself as one of the top 10 things you must not do.
Mm-hmm.
So why does it actually matter? We just started the process of answering that. Is that one, slander is actually sinful. Exodus 20, that's the 10 commandments. You've got in Matthew 12, Romans 1, 1 Peter 2, 2 Corinthians 12, Ephesians 4, Colossians 3. I stopped writing out after that because I was running out of space. There are plenty of places in both the Old Testament and the New Testament that will tell you that slander or bearing false witness against your neighbor is sinful.
Mm-hmm.
But there's more to it as to why it matters. That's the obvious one. The not so obvious ones are ones that we want to spend a little bit of time talking about. Why does slander matter is because slander is not loving your neighbor. Specifically, you can see that in James chapter 1. James is going to come up a lot today. James chapter 1 is one area where we see that. But specifically, Brandon, why do you think that slander is not loving your neighbor?
Well, as we've already talked about of what slander is, and then if we talk about what it isn't, so yeah, it'll be kind of the opposite, as we said, of love. And so why it's important is it's not a reflection of the body of Christ.
Right.
Of, again, the slander within and even our own, among own Christians, is typically where we see a lot of the slander being thrown, or at least how you've seen it personally.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic.
And so we're not bearing witness, even as Christians, to the love of Christ that we have of that reconciliation, to love one another.
So
And
there's what you're talking about. There is another aspect of this that I hadn't even put down because I hadn't even thought of as far as the witness side of not loving our neighbors. Is when we are constantly throwing the idea of you have slandered somebody around, and that is always your go-to defense. What is that actually showing the outside world as far as how Christians interact with each other?
yeah, it just seems like another political party that's
Exactly.
throwing mud at each other.
And not only that, but the people that are throwing this around are slandering other believers by doing it, or libeling other believers by doing this. We are not providing any kind of witness when this is always the go-to offense. Now, there are cases where when we have proof that this is what has happened, slander is the word to use, or libel is the word to use, whichever, depending on the situation.
Yes.
But the other side of why this is not loving your neighbor is that it is definitely not considering others more highly than ourselves. It's all about me or the person that I think has been wronged. Which is why in some cases, calling people out for slander is the loving thing to do, because you're loving the neighbors that have been slandered.
Yeah, and again, there's a heart posture within the slander
Right.
of it's not for myself to gain a higher position or for all these people online to say, oh, look how good Andrew is over here, but to say,
it's
no,
keeping each other accountable.
Yes, I want you to be closer to God. Here's what I am seeing here. This is how I want you to.
We're calling for reconciliation.
Yes.
We're not calling for further defamation of another person. We're calling for reconciliation of that person with the people that they have already defamed. The other things that we've got here is that obviously, if it's slander, it's not truth. And we talked about truth earlier this season. It was actually this season. I had to go back and check because I couldn't remember. It was this season. And part of what we talked about is that truth matters to God. It matters a whole lot to God. Because Jesus himself says, I am the
way, the truth, and the life.
I am the truth.
Yeah, he's the author of truth.
And so if something is what we are to desire, going back to last week of renewing our minds, we talked about the fact that the renewing of our minds is a Christocentric action. It's taking us towards the truth. So when we have this idea of slander being involved, it is pushing us away from where we are supposed to be focused. And that goes for both the person that is doing it and even the person that is now having to receive the slander on themselves. It's going to be pushing them further away from the truth. Because now the question comes out, okay, sometimes the question is, okay, is this person actually seeing something that I'm not? And now I'm having to spend time focusing on something that is not true and has no bearing on me. And in some cases, with the way that it's handled, now the doubts come in of, okay, if I am a slanderer, am I actually saved?
That's a good point, too, because kind of correlating back to the sin aspect as well, is it's very clear that, as we said, slander is in the Bible and that it's talked about as one of those fleshly, almost old things that we put away. Specifically in Colossians, in chapter 3, it says, you used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourself of such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. And again, that kind of tagline in there, from your lips, is another indication of the oral.
Paul knew that it had to be oral.
Yeah. So again, that's something that if we take a look at that, that's what our fleshly desires want. Honestly, that's where we go to, as we talked about last week.
It's our natural desire to see ourselves lifted up and other people pushed down. Which is contrary to what we talked about last week, that we are supposed to be having of this idea of we are no longer conformed to that. Instead, God is transforming us into a renewing of our mind to where we want other people elevated above us. Which means if we're going to defame anybody, it should be ourselves. This is part of what Paul talks about is, You can't boast about me. I can't boast about anything I've done. God's done it all.
Mm-hmm.
And not only has God done it all, then he goes and lists off all these other people that did the work. He does his best to tell people, I haven't baptized anybody, just to have his pesky writing assistant remind him of a bunch of people he did, which obviously made him a little bit angry.
Shush, I was trying to make a point here.
Because it's not about Paul.
Yeah.
It's not about him. And this leads us into the next part of why it matters for us as believers, is that it causes unnecessary divisions among us. 1 Corinthians 1 and the entirety of the book of James is this idea of when we allow these things to work their way in, what that does to us is it automatically is going to cause division of, well, this person said this. This person thinks that the other person said this. I know that this is true. I know that this is true. I know what this person also has said other times. And now we have all of these different camps lining up to throw more mud at the other.
Yeah, and I think the point that you're alluding to within there is that's really the gossip part of this.
Yeah, it is.
As well, where you might not be slandering per se, but it's the he said, she said within everything. So you are spreading the rumors, which is challenging, and then that can then lead to slander.
And that's where, again, the idea of intentionality comes in. Because sometimes gossip is just straight up slander.
Mm-hmm.
Other times gossip is just, why can't you keep your mouth shut? The idea of, if me sharing this is just because I can't keep it in anymore, even though it may not be true, I don't know if it's true, that is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it needs to be addressed. But if it's, oh, this person should know what this other person did, so that way they think about them differently, that's exactly what we're talking about here. And it's a problem. And even though we don't like to admit it, it's a major problem within our churches, especially when it comes time to, does anybody have any prayer requests?
Yeah. and one of the things that I've gone through is some of the giant leadership training, and they talk about the different traits that each of us have and kind of more of our tendencies. And one of the tendencies that typically my personality trait, believe it or not, has is they call it like toxic warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Of when we are not in the best place or we feel attacked. One of the things we do is toxic warfare, where it's basically you're kind of dropping a little bit of information here and there. You're just kind of spreading to let other people kind of stew, and you almost want people to agree with your opinion. Again, opinion can be thrown around versus
Right.
slander. But you want people to side with you, and you're just kind of dropping it off to people to see kind of what their reaction is going to be to what you're bringing to them.
Exactly. Now, why does it, the other thing we need to talk about with this is why it matters that we actually get it right in terms of what we are labeling as slander, what we are labeling as libel, what we are labeling even as gossip, what we are labeling as toxic warfare, whatever we want to label it. Why it matters is, we already said the first part is that truth matters to God, mm-hmm. because God is truth.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime that we are able to side on the side of truth, that's probably the place we should go.
Yes. Yeah. If our goal is to look more like Christ,
we probably should go to the thing that he called himself.
Yes.
Now, the other parts of this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. The second reason why it matters is because people's experiences do actually matter.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we start to get into what we have been seeing a lot within church culture over the past, 3 to 5 years, especially. Is there is a lot of silencing of victims of abuse, victims of illnesses, victims of doubt, victims of, mental illness, victims of all of these different things.
Mm-hmm.
And especially the ones that are calling out abuses within our churches, whether that's spiritual, sexual, racial, domestic, whatever. Is that if you share the story of what has happened to you, the accusations that immediately follow by the people that have not read 1 Corinthians 1, as far as who it is that we actually are worshiping within our churches, immediately come out of, you have slandered God's messenger, God's prophet. You have brought false witness against the brethren.
Mhm.
You have accused the brethren, which is a direct quote from James, maybe Jude. It's one of the J's. As far as a name for Satan is the accuser of the brethren.
Mm.
Whether you are intending it to be this or not, when you tell somebody that their story does not matter, and instead say that them sharing their story is just slander for whatever reason, whether it's for likes, whether it's for money, whether it's for fame, whether it's for, just straight revenge, whatever it is, what you are saying is that, one, the truth does not matter.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the first reason why we have to get it right. But then in addition to that, it's now that the people that you are accusing do not matter. And now we're back to why slander does not love our neighbor.
Yeah. And I like this part about the experience matters, because you can put people in the same environment and they're going to have different experiences.
Right.
I mean, we very much see that even within family dynamics, where you can have children from the same household grow up and they're going to tell you their experience was different from one to the next.
Right.
And so that really does play a big part in this as well. And tying back to the episode that we did, I think it was in season 1, where we talked about, I think it was debating within Christians and kind of how we work against conflict.
No, that was season 2.
It was season 2.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's been a long season 2 year.
Agree to disagree was the title of that
There
one.
we go. We're going to agree to disagree with season 2. No.
Yeah.
But I say that to bring up the point where, again, we can't say that our experience is the concrete evidence for
Right.
everything. It's the continual learning process for everybody to say, all right, this was my experience within the said church. Your experience was a lot different. Why did you feel that way? Why were you hurt? Why was that message condemning to you? And I think we can really learn from each other in that aspect.
And that's what we're actually called to do, right? We're supposed to weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn. We're supposed to bear each other's burdens. We're supposed to come together as a family.
Mm-hmm.
We're supposed to come together around a literal table. We're supposed to make sure that our hearts are all clear when we go before the altar. All of these sort of things should prevent these kind of attitudes from creeping in. Because it's not about us. It's not about whether or not everybody knows that Brandon was 15 minutes late for this, and so that's why we're all scrambling. Which didn't actually happen. That would be slander if we actually didn't clarify that.
2 minutes late.
2 minutes late. If I need everybody to know that, why? What's my heart posture? It's not about reconciliation. It's not about unity. It's not about the truth being known.
Mm-hmm.
It's about making either Brandon feel bad or making others make him feel bad.
Yeah, and I think the other distinction here with that same example, let's say you were on a time crunch and you had to pick up your kids, or there was a larger commitment you had afterwards. That is the point where us as Christians come to each other and say directly, and you say, hey, Brandon.
Right. Matthew 18.
Yes, your 15 minutes, I did not appreciate that. It was disrespectful of my time. Now I can't do such and such afterwards, or it's going to inhibit
this is
our
how
podcast.
It affected me.
Yes, yeah, and go to that person directly versus this large slandering side, which again, I think some people try to go one-to-one and it still comes across as slander, but again, it might be the heart posture of why you're trying to come to that person.
Because again, going back to agree to disagree, the attempt at reconciliation is not necessarily even about the other person. It's about us making sure that we are doing what we are called to do, regardless of if they will do the same or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about us. And this is where anytime that we see things going on, especially online related to any of these major pastors, when you have somebody that has lived and breathed that pastor, as far as the sermons, the church, the school, whatever, that has been hurt badly, and they're sharing their story, if your immediate reaction is, oh, look, this is one of the devil's agents, which is a word that also gets thrown around a lot in these conversations. This is a devil's agent that is accusing the brethren to divide the church. The irony of all of that is that you have now gone and done the exact thing you are accusing the other person of.
Mm-hmm. You're creating isolation for that person who's hurting.
You're causing more hurt. You're causing division among people that are trying to potentially reconcile or just be heard to be healed. And you are also preventing a reconciliation act from happening between said celebrity and the people that have been hurt, which normally only goes to pump up the ego of the person that did the hurting.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be intentional about what we are saying at all times. That's the other side of getting this right, is we need to just make sure we're intentional about what we're saying so that we don't get caught up in wanting to slander.
Mm-hmm.
But we also need to be intentional about what we are saying about other believers, about people outside the walls of the church, about the people in our government, which is a biggie for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I would just say leaders in general.
Right. But the other says we have to be intentional about what we are actually calling sin. Because if you are going to say that something is sinful to the point of that it has caused division between this person and God, which is what sin is,
mm-hmm.
then you better be sure that this has actually caused a division between them and God. Because what potentially is going to happen is that you saying that is going to be the thing that may actually be the divider between this person and the God that they've been searching for all along. Which is really the heart of the deconstruction movement. Is people that are searching for the actual God of the Bible, but are being given false versions of him.
Yeah, false
exploited
witness, yeah.
versions of him. And that is what we've got to stop in its tracks. And so we're going to walk through a couple passages out of James as far as what it looks like to stop this in its tracks after this quick break.
We'll be right back.
Today's a great day to start your own podcast. Whether you're looking for a new marketing channel, have a message you want to share with the world, or just think it would be fun to have your own talk show, podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your online reach.
Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online listened on all major platforms within minutes of finishing your first recording. We just switched to Buzzsprout for Season 2 and have immediately noticed the difference.
With Buzzsprout, you get a great-looking podcast website, audio players that you can drop into your websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and more. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and Buzzsprout and the Misfits want to help you get started.
Contact us for a free consultation call, and then visit our affiliate link to get started with Buzzsprout. Using this link not only helps support the Misfits, but it also gets you a $20 Amazon gift card. The teams at Buzzsprout and Ministry Misfits are passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. To find out more, go to www.ministrymisfits.com/affiliates.
Season 2 of the Ministry Misfits podcast and our awesome theme song are brought to you by Laird Creative Agency.
In our social media world, the next connection is always one click or scroll away, and your business has to be ready when they find you.
That's why Laird Creative is always looking for ways to step your brand up. Whether you're looking to overhaul your brand one time with a new website, or want to save money by outsourcing your graphic and media content, Laird Creative Agency is here to help. Laird Creative's mission is to take the difficulty out of the creative process. With Laird Creative, you'll find a dedicated team of artists ready to tackle any creative need that your business has, big or small.
If you're looking for an easier way to share the vision of your organization through thoughtful branding and creative content, find them at lairdcreativeagency.com to get started. Mention the Ministry Misfits podcast and get a free consultation call. Laird Creative, step your brand up.
We're back.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Ministry Misfits. Andrew and I today are talking about biblical slander.
Yes.
And we talked a little bit towards the beginning about more of the legal sense and the difference between slander and libel, and breaking that down again to both could be forms of defamation. However, the slander part, the key here is that it's an oral statement, so it's spoken. And with libel, that is more of a written
Anything.
Yeah, defamation. And it could be, again, on social media, as we see. So we also talked about more of the biblical definitions of slander and what that looks like, why it's important. One, because it's a sin. It's an example of not loving our neighbor.
Why it's important to know what it is, not
Yes.
that why it's important to be slandering. We're going to
Yeah.
clarify before we get that thrown around.
Yes. That's why we have, I'm sure there's sound bites floating out there of something.
I already know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know that it's important to know what it is because of the fact that it's a sin, because of the fact that it's not truth and God is truth and God cares about the truth, that it's not loving our neighbors, and that it causes unnecessary division.
Mm-hmm.
It's always going to cause unnecessary division because if it's not true, it's not needed. That's the main reason why we're saying it's unnecessary. We talked about why we need to actually get it right, which is because, again, it's true. We want truth if we're talking about what God is asking of us. We talked about the fact that people matter, and so do their stories.
Yeah.
And so we don't just assume something is slander if somebody is sharing a personal testimony. And then the intentionality behind everything. And now, Brandon, we're going to look at what James has to say about these ideas and walk through how biblical slander is supposed to be defined and actually dealt with. Not that what we did before doesn't count as defining it. But James specifically spends a lot of time talking about this stuff in much more theological terms. And so we've got a couple of verses pulled out. We're going to read all of James 3, but to start with, we have in chapter 1, James saying, "My dearly beloved brothers, understand this. Everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For man's anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourselves of all moral filth and evil. Humbly receive the implanted word which is able to save you." So this is a very clear way of how to avoid this.
Mm-hmm.
If we are quick to listen and slow to speak, we should, if, like we talked about last week, we are working within a renewed mind of where the Spirit is the one doing everything, we are Christocentric in nature, we should be able to determine whether or not what they're saying is true, whether it's slander, or whether it is just misinformation, or whether it's just gossip in general, which is still a problem.
Yes.
But not what we're talking about today. It's also how we are able to avoid slandering other people. Because if we are quick to listen to other people, when we are actually listening to somebody that develops a sense of empathy, we're not going to want to tear other people down when we actually are listening to them and we are listening to our neighbor who we love.
And I think a lot of times when we're in conversations, the practice in our mind, whether it's a topic or whatever the conversation is about, is we're quick to think about what am I going to say next?
Right.
And so you're sitting there rambling through your head of, I got to come up with the right words, or I know I'm going to have to pray about this, so I got to come up with what to say afterwards. So I've got this great prayer coming up. And we don't take that time to just listen to what the other person is saying, because we're so caught up on this great statement that we have to say next.
Which probably is not nearly as great as you think it is.
No.
You know, the other side of it is that if we do this, again, it's saying if we are quick to listen and slow to speak, that also will allow us to be slow to anger. Slander is an anger thing. That's the only way. We already said every definition we looked at, even within the Hebrew idea of exploiting somebody through like espionage, there's a level of hate to it. And hate comes from anger.
Mm-hmm.
Not always, but a lot of the times. And it's very clear, man's anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. And this is part of where, especially when we have people calling people out for slandering, specifically survivors are called out for slandering because of the person that they are accusing. If your first response to your celebrity pastor being accused of something is anger, not empathy for the person that is hurting, or listening in general to see what we know is to be true, if your first response is anger, it's not going to be something good coming out. Because man's anger does not accomplish God's righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
You trying to defend somebody that you think is God's chosen servant and doing so out of anger means either that you haven't been listening if it's God's chosen servant, because I'm pretty sure he would have said something about this at some point. And two, it's not going to accomplish the idea of defending this person as a godly man if you are coming at everybody out of anger.
And I think it depends on what you're angry at, because a lot of the time it's anger towards the person versus anger towards the sin, if it is sin,
or the ideology, depending on what it is.
Yeah,
that's part of why we're very, very specific about, we very rarely online and even on here will name drop bad things. We'll name drop the good stuff all day long.
Yeah,
that we're gonna do all day long, but it's very rare for us to name drop. And even a lot of the times on Twitter, if there's something that somebody has said that we want people to see as an example, I block out the name in the picture, because it's not about the person, it's about the message that they are spreading.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just about calling this person out, we have a problem.
Yeah.
That's not what we were supposed to do. Now, we did talk about in the Agree to Disagree and in the Tribalized Theology episodes that sometimes it is important to call the person out, especially when it is somebody that claims to be a prophet or a major pastor of pastors, or somebody that is claiming to be a religious leader or a political leader and is showing these things and claiming it to be Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that needs to be called out, but not because the person is evil.
Correct.
But because the ideology that is associated with that person must be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what we're talking about here. The other side of it is the idea of, if we are ridding ourselves of moral filth and evil, which is what we talked about last week with the transforming and renewing, it says to humbly receive the implanted word which is able to save you. When we are responding to these sort of things with our own mouths and our own minds and out of anger, it's not going to go well.
No.
But if we are slow to speak, slow to anger, we are listening, we are trusting the fact that we are letting God renew our mind, and we are trusting the word that has been implanted in us, the response typically that is coming back, if we are refuting something, especially on a theological level, should be coming out of the scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is what is able to save.
Yes. Nothing that we can do on our own power.
Right. God is the one that will save us. Christ is the one that will save us. And Christ has given us the tools to be able to show this to other people. And so rather than calling somebody out as an agent of Satan, if you believe that they are slandering, and especially slandering the brethren or slandering Christ himself through false teaching, you should be able to back it up here somehow. Now, the next part of this goes into a little bit more. We're still in chapter 1. This is verse 26. It says, if anyone thinks he is religious without controlling his tongue, then his religion is useless and he deceives himself. Pure and undefiled religion before our God and Father is this, looking after orphans and widows in their distress and keeping oneself unstained by the world. If you can't control your tongue, what are you even doing?
Yeah.
And this is where it gets kind of fun when we start talking about especially religious Twitter, religious Facebook, religious insert social media network here. There are a lot of people that will go on and on and on about this theological thing or this theory or this, and this, while simultaneously bashing the person that is calling people to go out and serve, calling people to call out oppression, calling people to just stop being jerks to people online, calling out white supremacists that are doing these sort of things. What does it say? If you can't control your tongue,
Your religion is basically useless.
it's useless.
Yeah.
All that theology, all
like
that
the,
other
the
stuff.
clanging gong.
It's literally a clanging gong out of 1 Corinthians 13. It's all useless. Because pure religion is not about what we're saying. It's about what we are doing.
Mm-hmm.
That is how people will know we are his disciples, is by our love. This again is why slander is a sin, because it is the opposite of loving our neighbors. Because if what we are saying does not match what we are doing, or unfortunately in this case, if what we are saying matches what we are doing, we're not loving our neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then I love that that verse is followed up with concrete example there of like what to do for religion, of look after orphans and widows in their distress and keep one unstained by the world.
Well, it's one of those things that's fun when you look at like Paul and like how he has to say the same thing to the same people in a second letter. You can only imagine it's partly because he said all this stuff. And he's like, oh, this is good. They're going to get it. And then he gets later back like, what do you mean by? James is smarter than that. He goes a step ahead and is like, if you do this, your religion is useless. Oh, and if you're going to ask me what actual useful religion looks like, I'll give you a couple examples. That's covering
some paper.
Yes, we're going to save some stamps. So, yeah, when we're talking about slander, though, this is part of why it's so important and why we must keep it at a minimum as the minimum. We need to just let it go altogether. But if we can at least keep it at a minimum, it's because of the fact that if we are not controlling our tongue, nothing else that we are doing really matters.
And we haven't talked about it yet either, but I think just one of the, I don't want to say simplistic, but best practices is just going to God in prayer about it.
Right.
Or about that person, because we
sets
do
the
get,
heart.
yes, we do get frustrated with others. We do create unmet expectations for others that frustrate us. And so to be able to go to the Lord, lay that before him, and say, I pray for this leader because I do not understand why they're doing this or why they're saying it this way. Right. Or my heart hurts for this person because they have been wronged or there's been sinned against. I think, that was really creating that heart posture, if I can say that right.
Well, it's doing what we saw in the verses we read the first time of, if you are immediately going to God in prayer about this, you definitely at that point are being slow to speak and slow to anger. Because it's not about us. It's a Christocentric method of doing this sort of thing. It's resetting our heart posture back to, am I actually wanting to see reconciliation out of this or not? which is much harder to do even than just controlling the tongue, honestly. If we're being 100% honest.
True.
It's much easier actually to bite your tongue than it is to remember, oh, I need to be praying for this person.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point of what we talked about last week of why God is the only one that can actually renew our mind. Is because there's a lot of other things pushing for us to go to the conform route rather than the transform route. Now, we want to read James chapter 3, which is not as long as it sounds. Brandon's having flashbacks again to 12 Days of Misfits.
Yeah.
And you should, because this was one of your verses. So we're going to read the whole chapter here. It's only like 18 verses. But this chapter, more than any other, deals with not just slander, but just bad talk in general.
Mm-hmm.
But we're focusing in on slander today. So this is what James says in James chapter 3. Not many should become teachers, my brothers, knowing that we will receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a mature man who is also able to control his whole body. I have a feeling there's a little bit of sarcasm in there that it's like, yeah, none of you are there. Now, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we also guide the whole animal. And consider ships, though very large and driven by fierce winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So too, though, the tongue is a small part of the body, and it boasts great things. Considers how large a forest a small fire ignites. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue, a world of unrighteousness, is placed among the parts of our bodies. It pollutes the whole body and sets the course of life on fire, and it is set on fire by hell. Every sea creature, reptile, bird, or animal is tamed and has been tamed by man, but no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. We praise our Lord and Father with it, and we curse man who are made in God's likeness with it. Praising and cursing come out of the same mouth. My brothers, these things should not be this way. Does a spring pour out sweet and bitter water from the same opening? Can a fig tree produce olives, my brothers, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a saltwater spring yield fresh water. Who is wise and has understanding among you? He should show his works by good conduct with wisdom's gentleness. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't brag and deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For wherever envy and selfish ambition exists, there is disorder and every kind of evil. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruit, without favoritism and hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who cultivate peace. He does a lot in a very short amount of verses here.
Mm-hmm.
And before we get the angry messages, this is not an argument that works is what saves us. It's an argument that our works show the fact that we are saved.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the story of James, and that's part of why James deals so much with the idea of speech throughout the entire book.
Yeah, or very similar to what we talked about in our huddle last week,
Right.
With in Galatians, the fruits of the Spirit. Another outpouring of your faith, of the testimony of that is your fruits that you will bear witness to.
Well, and the fruits he gives are the same ones that Paul gives. Peace, love, gentleness, self-control would be another one for compliant. Mercy, no favoritism, no hypocrisy. That's literally what Paul talks about in like every single letter he writes.
Mm-hmm.
That is what we should look like. James doesn't have as much faith in us, though, as Paul does. Because Paul's like, we'll get there, just pray your way through it, build, don't be conformed, be transformed by the renewing of our mind.
Yeah, a little bit more of there's hope for everybody.
James is like, yeah, nobody has done this outside of Jesus, our Lord and Father, who we bless, but then at the same time we curse.
Mm-hmm.
Because no man can do this. Which is why it's so important for us to actually understand what it is that we're talking about today. Because there are going to be plenty of opportunities for us to do exactly what we are not supposed to do. And like we said before, this is what it shows the world. It shows the world that we are full of restless evil and deadly poison. Not full of good fruits that bring about the gospel. It's not the fruit of righteousness that brings about peace. It's the fruit of unrighteousness that brings about division.
and I know this isn't directly correlated to biblical slander, but I think it can be a starting point for us and creep into other areas where in sports a lot of times there is so much division or rivals within teams, whether it's your local high school, major sports teams, college teams, whatever. There's this hate or yeah, like I can't stand this team, I can't stand that fan base, and I think we let that creep into our lives a lot of times as well. And again, it's not, there's that playfulness sometimes within there, but I think a lot of times it can be a slander and or hate for somebody, and we completely rip away the Imago Dei
Exactly.
standpoint. And I bring that up because I think that's a very tangible point in a lot of people's lives that we can point to and say, okay, maybe not on a daily basis we're going around slandering that said person, but it can lead and creep into other ways if we're not careful to watch our tongue, to watch our mouth when we're watching a game in front of people, because that's not being the biblical representation at all.
And I mean, that's literally what we have in verse 9. We praise our Lord and Father with it, and we curse man who are made in God's image.
Mm-hmm.
We're praising God and then cursing the thing that looks like him. And then the
just
question,
because they're wearing a certain
because they're wearing a
jersey.
certain thing, because they listen to a certain thing, because they have tattoos, because they have piercings, because they drink a little bit, because they smoke a little bit, because they do this, because they don't listen to the pastor that I listen to, because they do listen to the pastor that my pastor says we shouldn't listen to, because they don't join Patreon for Ministry Misfits. Those sort of things are what we start focusing on. We lose the fact that this is the image of God that we are actually talking about. And the question that has to come out of it is, if we are praising God and then immediately turning around and cursing the creation he made in his image, which one is actually genuine?
Mm-hmm.
And we know which one is actually genuine. James tells us which one is genuine. It's not the praising of God that's the genuine action.
No.
We have got to get it under control, especially for those of us that are in ministry. That's the first verse. You shouldn't become teachers because you're going to get a stricter judgment.
Yeah, he's simply saying that there's a higher standard.
You have more to lose than everybody else, and yet, unfortunately, because we are teachers, we are using our mouths constantly.
That's a good point.
There is way more opportunity for us to do this, both good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just have to watch how we do it. And we're going to close out with how to do this with chapter 4, and specifically verse 11 and 12, where James says, don't criticize one another. He who criticizes a brother or judges his brother criticizes the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. Because there is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge your neighbor? Pretty self-explanatory. Just don't do it.
Yeah, and again, easier said than done.
A
lot of times, because as we read in chapter 3,
nobody can do this.
Yeah.
And this is part of the reason why we're talking about this today. And this is not a like, oh, look at us, pat us on the back sort of thing. But this is part of why, whenever anybody asks, how should you actually go about arguing with somebody? Is remembering that we are arguing with our neighbor and we are arguing with an image bearer. And so our argument is not with them. Our argument is with their argument.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are saying that we are doing things from a Christocentric model, everything should be directed back at the truth, which means that some of what they're saying may actually be valid.
Yes.
Even when they are slandering us, some of what they are saying may be valid. So rather than criticize one another, we should remember the fact that they are loved image bearers and that we are called to love them as well. Even if they are not our neighbor and they're our enemy, we are still called to love them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Even if the end of that conversation ends in disagreement.
Right.
You're still to love them.
And even if it does end with you still being slandered, it doesn't matter. This is what we are called to do. Because it's not about us. It's about God, and it's about the people that God has created in his image. And so this is where we're going to leave this part of it for today. We've defined it. We've given examples of it.
Mm-hmm.
We've walked through the book that deals with it more than anybody else.
We've talked about what it is not.
We've also talked about what it's not. And so now the question is, okay, what does this look like for me personally? And we can't do that part of it, or else we would potentially be slandering and everything else.
True.
So if you want to actually let us know how you deal with this stuff, let us know. You can do that in a bunch of different ways. The Facebook group is the easiest one for a lot of people to get involved. Twitter is another easy one because a lot of people will get involved. All those sort of things. You can also email us, ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com. You can also submit a message to us through our website, ministrymisfits.com. All those different ways. We want to hear from you on this because this is a very big issue for everybody.
Yes.
If you claim that it's not, go back and read what we just read out of James.
Yeah, especially James 3.
Especially James 3, where he's going to tell you, yeah, you're still not off the hook. So let us know what you think related to this, how you deal with this in your own life, how you don't deal with this in your own life, all of those good things. Also, Patreon, patreon.com/Ministry Misfits. If you want to join Patreon, that's where to do it. Patreon.com/Ministry Misfits. We've got 4 different levels of varying levels of money.
Yep.
Amounts. That's the word I was looking for.
5, 10, 20, and 100.
Yes. And then in addition to that, there may be another level added on at an even lower rate, potentially if we have enough interest in doing the Galatians Bible study here in the month of March while we are on break. So if you are interested in that, let us know, same way you did the other stuff.
We've also got different affiliate links available on our website at ministrymisfits.com. One of those is Giving Bean.
Yes.
So if
go get your coffee. It's starting to get cold again.
Yes, it is. Yeah, today was cold.
So it was bad today.
Yeah. So if you want to get your own coffee beans to grind, K-cups, tea.
Just about anything
cookies.
For your coffee-loving needs, if you actually like coffee.
Yeah, stop on our website first, and then that'll bring you over to the Giving Bean where you can set up your order.
Yes, and you can also set it to be a monthly order. They also have some monthly boxes. If you don't know what you want, you just want to try everything, they'll just send you a random box full of goodies for, I think it's like $25 a month, something like that. In addition to that, there's also our stores there where you've got all the fun stuff, mugs for that coffee, tumblers for that coffee, as well as sweatshirts, t-shirts, all the good stuff that you need to get you through the winter. And to get all the stuff that you still haven't gotten Christmas gifts for the people that you still haven't seen for,
now we're moving to Valentine's Day. We got to start about the people you love.
That's true. The people that I can guarantee you that your spouses are dying for a Ministry Misfits mug with Brandon and I's faces on it. That's
might bring up
be big.
Some more questions.
Yes. So in the meantime, we'll see you next week. Next week, we're going to dive into the abyss that is patriarchy. And all that is enveloped with that. And our special guest, Pastor Andy Avram. Some of you that are on Twitter know her as Pastor Andy. It's, pun, Pastor Andy. She's also the one that has started the rumors that we're women. So we'll also be able to finally prove to her that we're not.
Yeah, myth busted.
Myth busted. Check us out next week. See us bust that myth as well as bust up the patriarchy on next week's Ministry Misfits episode.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Ministry Misfit Media in association with Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. The Ministry Misfits theme song is written and produced by J.D. Laird and Laird Creative Agency. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also visit our website at www.ministrymisfits.com or through bio.link/Ministry Misfits. If you would like to support Ministry Misfits, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/Ministry Misfits.